officially since January, right?
That's right, yes.
Is your official role. And so will you just talk a little bit about what it means to be a dean at the law school? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's some basic functions that probably most people realize, which is, running the law school. So I work with the university directly on making sure that we, meet our budget expectations, that we stay in line with all of our finances. And that's, of course, a big deal. We have over 700 students total in the building. And so, managing all of that. And then our faculty, we have 28 full-time faculty, and then dozens of adjunct faculty that, each semester that will teach a class here or there. So, trying to manage all that, keep things running smoothly. We've got of course, our beautiful building here, from, I think, 1892 when this building was built. And so there's always maintenance and upkeep that we work on here. And so I'm not, physically doing that myself, but just making sure that we have the resources to keep our facilities operational. And then I guess the other parts that are really a little bit more external, that would include working with alumni. So we have about 9,000 living alumni.
Wow.
That we try and engage with as much as possible. And of course, they're spread all over the country and around the world. But most of them are still here in Southeast Michigan. So we try and connect with them through events and, lunches and visits, just to try and make sure that I'm keeping a pulse on what our alumni are feeling and what their expectations are for the law school. And then the other big piece is just students. So whether it's recruiting the next class or, making sure that we're getting everything to our current students that they need to be successful, that's, kind of the whole thing. So it's sort of like the operational stuff, but then I spend a great deal of time with the external work, which is working with our alumni, but then also trying to recruit our next class of students and then help them be successful in their careers.
Wow. Yeah, that's, reading through your bio and some of your stuff and saw that your expertise is environmental justice and water law, mm-hmm. which I find fascinating. Will you talk about, I guess, two things? I was thinking, what is it about that area that interests you? And then how did you get started in that?
Yeah. So really interesting. When I went to law school, and I'm from Michigan, I actually went to law school just up the street at Wayne State University Law School. So from the area. But when I went to law school, I thought I was going to go into maybe like city management or planning. I was an urban studies and political science undergrad. And I was really interested in just kind of like how cities function, how they're planned, and then also like open space. So I was kind of fascinated with like parks and transit and that kind of planning. So when I went to law school, I thought, okay, I'm going to get that law degree, but then that'll help me, maybe work for the planning department in Detroit or become a city manager, that kind of thing. Then in law school, I took environmental law, and I didn't really know much about the field. I'd always been an environmentalist, but I didn't really understand the legal side of it as much. I think you've heard of like the famous, Sierra Club litigation or, some right. cases like that, but I didn't really know the nuts and bolts of how it worked. And then I found that area of law meshed really well with my own background and interests and passions and all of that. So I took every class I could about environmental law, and then I had a internship with the Attorney General's office working on criminal environmental prosecutions when I was in law school. And then I was fortunate I've been able to work in the environmental legal field my whole career. So I started out working for a organization called the Great Lakes Commission, which is funded by the 8 Great Lakes states and 2 Canadian provinces to work on Great Lakes policy-related issues. Then I went to National Wildlife Federation. I was there for a few years. Then helped start this organization called the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, where I was the first full-time director of that organization. And around that time, I got into teaching too. So as far as becoming dean, it was sort of like, I'd say, public interest environmental law work. Started my career that way. Started running an environmental clinic also at Wayne Law. And then 8 years ago, I made the move to come to Detroit Mercy Law, which I was thrilled. It was to direct our entire clinic program. So
got it.
Across the street from the church, we have the Buell building, which is the old fire station, and that's where our law clinics are housed. And so my initial job here was running all of our, at the time, I think we had 11 clinics. Now we're up to 14. But running those as far as the administrative, I wasn't actually teaching all those clinics, but I was, the administrator in charge of them. And then teaching an environmental clinic and also teaching environmental law here at Detroit Mercy. And so what really brought me here, though, was I was very interested in the service aspect of the mission of this law school. I've my whole career worked with community groups and nonprofit organizations, primarily on environmental issues. And so the history of the law school here and the work that they've done in the community was really meaningful to me, and it's something that I thought could be a good fit with my own skills and experience. So came here, and then after being on the faculty for, I guess it was close to 6 years or so, I had the opportunity to be interim dean, which I did, and then decided to throw my hat in the ring for the full position, and then ultimately was selected. The faculty supported me, and then also the president ultimately is the one that makes the hire. So,
right.
But yeah, so that's a little bit of how and I don't know that the environmental and Great Lakes and water law background is necessarily good training to be dean, but I will say, running a law clinic, working with several students each semester, and then also running a nonprofit and working in nonprofits, that's been really helpful, because I've always done throughout my career a degree of fundraising and nonprofit management, which in a sense is what I do here.
Right.
It's just you have a little bit more of the public facing stuff, like we talked about at the beginning, like get welcoming speakers and giving intros and doing the kind of glad handing stuff. So there's that more almost like politician role of the job that's a little different than just being an executive director of a nonprofit or pastor of a church, that kind of thing. Although pastor of a church is actually similar in some ways because of the public facing stuff. So anyway, that's kind of my background, and I've got into teaching in a non-traditional way, which was I had been working for quite some time and doing public interest environmental work, and then got into clinical teaching. And then that's how I ended up kind of an academic path.
Well, this is definitely a good fit, right? Because the Jesuits are very passionate about social justice issues. That's right. So I think that idea, your expertise in environmental justice is a nice, it's complementary with the Jesuits here at the law school. Yes. I want to get into Red Mass a little bit, because I think there's a lot of people who don't really know what Red Mass is. But first, before we go into Red Mass, how does, kind of tying in that idea of the Jesuits and all of that, how does your faith inform your justice work? That's
a great question. So I was raised in a Protestant church, so Congregational Church up in Rochester, Michigan, First Congregational, and my father raised Catholic, went to Catholic school in Ohio, and both my father and mother were very, service oriented in their approach to the type of like social events we do were often like service related, I guess, to put that way. They volunteered a lot, and so that was, I guess, an ethic that was instilled into me and my siblings, and so really from a very young age, I was always involved in whether they were church events, or then we got involved in a lot of different like nonprofit related work. Did a lot of work for food pantry up in Rochester, and so I've always kind of had that connection, and also as a kid did a lot of work with Focus Hope in Detroit, where we'd come down for that as well. So it's always been a bit of who I am. And then as far as my faith, it's interesting. I went to, it was at the time Elmhurst College, now Elmhurst University in right outside Chicago for undergrad, and that college was affiliated with the United Church of Christ, which was organization, that my church was part of. And so that, in fact, our minister that we had growing up, he had gone to that college. And so that was how I even ended up going there and visiting and seeing this could kind of be a good fit. That, and then trying to decide if I wanted to play football in college was a whole thing. Cause I was really trying to decide, okay, do I want to go to, Eastern Michigan and play football and have that be my thing? Or do I want to do, a smaller college experience? And anyway, this is all getting to the point of like my faith background is really what led me to college. And then in college, I had this urban studies professor that really got me thinking about how people interact with their built environment, how oftentimes as a society we don't invest in quality of life issues that are so important for people, but that also includes things like affordable housing and affordable transit and eliminating food deserts and all that kind of stuff, which was really sort of what I was interested in college, and then it's kind of gone on through there. So my sort of like professional background, I think, was very influenced by my faith growing up, but then also by my family's involvement with the church and all of that. And then, you fast forward, my parents divorced and they've both gone on and remarried, and my wife and I are both in similar jobs. So she's a teacher, but now she is the president of her education association, her union up in Rochester. Then I'm the dean of the law school. So we both do these. They're very like service oriented jobs, right. Although not necessarily faith-based. But I think we both have a lot of that. That's sort of like what we're passionate about, is helping people, and I hope that ultimately, through my work here, that the law school is in a little bit better shape whenever I'm done, and that as a result too, that our community is a little bit stronger based on the service we're able to provide. And so, just to circle back to the beginning, I knew a little bit about Jesuits and their educational philosophies. I knew a little bit about the work that the University of Detroit and then Detroit Mercy has done and continues to do here in the city of Detroit. And so I was interested and attracted to that when I came here, and it's just been now over the past 7 years, I've just really grown such an appreciation. I talked about in my interview for Dean, Pope Francis, his Laudato Si, where he focused so much on really environmental justice and climate justice. And I've talked a lot to our students about, care for our common home. That includes, care for our environment. And that includes making sure that we have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe, and making sure that we're listening to that cry of the earth and cry of the poor that, Pope Francis so eloquently wrote about. Right. And so, again, not myself being a practicing Catholic, but knowing a little bit about those traditions and just really finding that the values that I have, that my family has, are so closely aligned with the values of this institution, and more broadly with the Jesuits and Sisters of Mercy. Yeah.
Well, and even I'm familiar with United Church of Christ, and they're very social, justice-minded, very much so, and have partnered with their churches and organizations for social justice issues in the past. So that makes it a nice hand in hand with the Jesuits.
It really is. And I mean, I'll just give an example. When I was in high school, I did multiple spring break, but they were mission or service projects, where we were actually going to work for somewhere. Right. And then also in college, I did hurricane relief in Honduras one year, and it was just Habitat for Humanity was another group that I got really involved in college, and was able to go and do a bunch of different work projects. And so for me, that's we talk a lot in the law about being a lawyer. It's a privilege. It really is a privilege to be able to practice law. And that part of that is that we're expected to give back. Yes. And so, a lot of lawyers, they meet that service obligation by writing a check to the Access to Justice Fund or something. But what we really try and instill in our students is that when we're at our best, lawyers are serving the community in many ways, not just individual clients, but that are also able to promote a better social fabric within our whole community. And so that's, again, something that we really focus on here because of the Jesuit traditions. And that's just, every time I talk to our students, I'm always threading in, what it means to walk with the excluded and outcasts of the world, what it means to care for our common home. And that I hope that we are graduating lawyers that not only go on to have successful legal careers, but that are also just understand the broader mission of our work, which is to promote community, to promote everybody realizing their full potential.
Yeah. Being community-minded, right? So you're hopefully changing the perspective, right? Because I watch a lot of law. I watch a lot of crime and a lot of drama, stuff like that. Although Law and Order, the original Law and Order, my favorite, and they were all Jesuit lawyers.
Right. Well, it is, and then just to say real quick, the attorneys often get a bad rap, right? Because you see some of the high profile ethical lapses and all that kind of thing. But what we really do try and focus on training lawyers that can go on to not only have successful careers, but to have that sense of service and that sense of mission related to the practice of law. And I think it does. It fits hand in glove with the Jesuit educational philosophy and also the social justice work that they're involved in. And so when I talk with students that choose to come to Detroit Mercy Law, often one of the things they highlight is our social justice work, the work that we do in our community, and that even if they're Muslim or they're Jewish or other faith backgrounds or completely secular, they care about our tradition and our role here in the community. And so that's something that's been meaningful for me as a faculty member here, and then now certainly as dean.
Right. And I think that's kind of a good segue into Red Mass, because one of the purposes, at least from my understanding, now I'm new to the Jesuit world. I have Catholic roots, but then I was evangelical for 25 years, and now I'm back, so which is a whole different podcast. But one of the purposes of Red Mass is to renew your ethics and your understanding of that being a lawyer isn't just about you, it's about the bigger picture and the communities. So, and I know Red Mass is an important element of UDM. So will you just talk a little bit about Red Mass, like what it is, what you do, and who it's open to, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's a time to refocus, to be thoughtful, prayerful, if that aligns with people's traditions, at the start of the judicial year. And so it's something that started in England. Perhaps maybe even started back in like Roman law. I'm not sure on the history there, but I know that this was an English tradition and then carried over to the United States. And so there's many law schools will participate in a Red Mass, but we are the longest running Red Mass here in the United States, which is really exciting. The other big one that's celebrated every year is at the National Cathedral for the Supreme Court. So they do a Red Mass around the same time that we do each fall. But so this is, in 1877, there was the first Red Mass that was held here. And then after a bit of a pause, the law school started in 1912. And then we've been carrying on that tradition most years, since 1912. I think there's only been a year or two that it didn't occur because of, World War II or something, big events. Exactly. Right. COVID. And even then, during COVID, we were able to do, a remote service,
at
least for one of those years. And so it's been this great tradition. And so what we do is we bring lawyers and judges, but then also just community, right? Anyone, of course, can attend. And it's an opportunity to renew our oath. So there's a judicial oath, or I should say, attorney's oath, that any lawyer swears in front of a judge before being admitted to practice law in the state. And so we renew that oath. We'll often, in the program, we print some words from Thomas More about, what it means to be a lawyer and an advocate and all of that. And then typically we hear from a couple different speakers. We may have one of the Jesuits come down from the university and offer some words. And then this year we're very excited that we'll have Archbishop Edward Weisenberger, the new Archbishop for the diocese here in Detroit, will be joining us. And then Judge Shalina Kumar, who's a 1996 grad of our law school. She's on the federal court in the Eastern District here. So she's going to actually lead us all in the renewal of our our oath, which is very similar to a vow, right?
Vows. I keep saying vows, but
yeah, I know, right? It's very, very similar. And really what that is we have this oath that talks about respect for the Constitution of the United States, but also the state of Michigan, respect for the judiciary, and then all of these things that we as attorneys agree to do from an ethical standpoint and a professional standpoint. And it's just a really nice opportunity to refocus us that. But again, it's also a Mass that we welcome everyone to participate in. And of course, we welcome people from all backgrounds. So, many of our students will attend who, they might not be Catholic, but they want to be there as part of that time to focus and just really put a fine point on the importance of what it is to practice law, what it is to be someone who is representing clients that are dealing with some of the most difficult issues that they may ever face in their lives as their attorney. And then also, I think, a chance for judges to reflect and have some time to think about the importance of the work that they do. Because it's a heavy burden, right? That they're often left making decisions about whether someone is incarcerated or whether somebody gets released. And that, really does weigh on people. And so again, it's just a good opportunity for us to all get together, start the fall with this time of reflection and hopefully some, certainly some inspirational words that we'll hear from our speakers. And just a good way to kind of kick off the academic year for us, and then also the judicial year in terms of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because this is kind of the official kickoff for that.
That's right.
I appreciate you using the word advocate, because I think we forget that's really the role that we are.
That's right.
In the courtroom, is that we are advocating for somebody else.
That's right.
And we remember how the significance of being an advocate for somebody else. That's kind of gone by the wayside. And I think the whole role of a lawyer is to be an advocate and to mind somebody else's business.
That's right.
Because you're coming alongside them and, two is stronger than one, right?
Yeah, there's a joke I'm kind of going to paraphrase, but it's that, like, everybody likes to make fun of lawyers and doesn't care about them until they need one, right? And that's because you're often, again, dealing with people that are, whether it's going through personal crisis or whether they have some major financial decisions that need to be made, and they're often looking for someone to not only know what the law is and advise them on that, but that also to advocate for them, to make sure that they've got someone in their corner pushing for their interests. And then, the part of being an attorney that we often leave off, a lot of law firms used to say attorneys and counselors.
Yeah.
And I think the counselors part is something we need to focus more on, which is really, we'll often have clients that they're only seeing things from their perspective, and they're only looking for a result that of course serves their interest, right? But oftentimes as attorneys, we have to say, well, I hear you, I understand where you're coming from, but there's a whole line of cases that go the other direction, or like, let's look at what the your defendant or the opposing party is arguing, and see, because there's often some overlap between people's interests, but it's very difficult for clients to sometimes see anything beyond themselves, which is, I guess, just human nature. So I think part of when, again, attorneys are doing their job effectively, you also have that counseling aspect, which is sometimes, talking our clients out of doing something, right? Like, it's maybe not a good idea to file this lawsuit, or maybe not a good idea to buy that piece of property. And that's not always what our clients want to hear, but we have an obligation ethically to say, well, this is what the law is. This is what my experience would tend to dictate, what the outcome might be here. And so I'm going to advise you to do that. And then, ultimately the client decides what they want, and you have to do that work for them. But I think as lawyers, when we're using that counselor part of our profession, we can be much more effective and helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate you said that. Those are good points. Advocate and counsel. Maybe our terms we just throw around and we forget that they have a purpose, and they have an actual definition, and they have a purpose in law.
Right.
And then they all work together.
Right.
It's not just, I have the knowledge of how the law works, but I also have the knowledge of how to give you proper counsel and how to advocate for you. So
it is, people don't think about lawyers as having a bedside manner like a physician or clergy, right? But there's, in my clinic, when I would talk with my students, I would mention that how important it is to build those relationships with your clients. Part of it's self-interest. You're less likely to have a client, sue you or file a grievance if they like you and if they feel as though you're doing your best for them and working as hard as you possibly can, even if you don't get the result that they were hoping for. So that's important. It's important for students to learn while they're in law school the importance of building that relationship with your clients, being in constant communication with your clients, keeping them updated about their case, so that they don't just get a bill in the mail one day without any knowledge of what you've been working on and all of that. So there's some of the soft skills or the human interest side of the practice of law. Law schools have not always been good at that. They're better at doctrinal law, learning what it is, but this whole practice of law, we talk about educating the complete lawyer, and that's, I think, we infused the mission of the Jesuits and Sisters of Mercy in that. But the complete lawyer for us is someone who is thinking about the client holistically, but also thinking about themselves holistically, right? Making sure that they're, yes, advocating for their client, but also making sure that we're serving the broader needs of justice and making sure that people have access to justice. And I'll just say one other thing about my clinic work. I would often say to my students that when we get into litigation, that's actually a failure. I view that as a failure, right? That we haven't figured out a way, either through negotiations or through perhaps even some sort of administrative process, to solve problems, right? Like when we're actually in court suing the state or suing some industrial facility for excess pollution, that's a failure, right? Like that we really want to avoid. That is the last option, right? And so much of the practice of law, I think, again, when we're doing it effectively, the public never sees, because it's that counseling, it's that advocating for your client in a letter to someone to try and get a result, right? Without filing the big lawsuit and all that splashy stuff that you see on TV. That's a very small percentage of what a lawyer actually does. And I think in particular, a lawyer that we hope is a complete lawyer that with our educational philosophy, that they're seeing the broader role of the work that they're doing from a societal perspective and a justice perspective, and not always just so narrowly for their clients' interests.
Rounded out this idea of what it means to be a complete lawyer, and that you said going to court is actually like, that's supposed to be the last thing that you do. Kind of like we laugh and we say, it's reduce, reuse, recycle.
That's right.
Recycle's the last one.
That's right.
You want to reduce, reuse first.
Yep.
And even that, I used to do Taekwondo, my husband and I did, and they said, fighting is the last resort.
Right.
You need to, you want to use all these other aspects to avoid actually getting into a fight.
Yeah.
Right? The public sees the courtroom. They don't see the other stuff behind the scenes. And
so much of it is behind the scenes, and there are so many lawyers, our graduates, just members of the bar here in Michigan and across the country that never really stepped foot in a courtroom. Right? They're doing so much work behind the scenes, whether it's working on legislation or working on ordinances at the local level, or they're working on administrative issues, and so they're never really in a court as it is. It's a very small percentage of people that go on to be litigators, and it's a particular skill set, right? I mean, there's people that are they're almost have sort of a drama aspect to the work that they do, because you need to persuade a judge or a jury based on your arguments, and so but yeah, it's just interesting for folks outside of the practice of law. You'd understandably think that it's always the prosecutors and the criminal defense attorneys going head to head, and it's always these trial lawyers suing people for everything, and that really is a tiny percentage of what it means to be a lawyer in legal work. Again, there's specialists that all they do is litigation and all they do is courtroom work, but that's a very small number of the overall amount of practicing attorneys out there.
So real law would make a boring television show.
If watching someone review thousands of pages of documents to look for a potentially interesting issue, or poring over spreadsheets. In my environmental practice, we did so much work just looking at whether there was an exceedance of a permit for air pollution, water pollution, and it's basically poring over spreadsheets. I know some of the stuff now I think can be done with AI and some software tools, but even with those advancements, it's still a lot of, we'll just say, document review, right? Yeah, and so we say to our students, like, yeah, you have to do a lot of reading while you're in law school, but that's good preparation for practice where you're going to be doing a lot of reading. I mean, that's another thing that, we focus a lot on is legal research and legal writing, because so much of being a lawyer is being an effective communicator. And again, it's not typically the attorney in front of a judge, makes this amazing closing argument where the jury's weeping because it's just such a passionate, like that's just such a small amount, but television would have you believe that that's what we do all the time. But so much of practicing law is trying to avoid litigation. It's timely, it's time consuming, it's expensive. It's almost always better to try and resolve things before going to court, but sometimes it is all you've got, right? And that's your last resort, and it's necessary and absolutely there for a reason. But I haven't watched the show Suits, but my students talk about it all the time, and they're like, oh, before I got to law school, I thought that's what being a lawyer was, but boy, what a difference. So, and from what I've heard and understand, that there's many ethical violations in every single episode, right? Those attorneys would be in trouble.
First episode starts with it like that, yeah. So thinking about new students, especially since it's the beginning of the year, you've got seniors who are figuring out what they want to do next year in high school, or they're figuring out where they want to go. So what advice or encouragement might you give those seniors who are considering a career or a vocation in law school or law? I mean,
great question. Yeah. So for us, and this is the same with most law schools in the United States and Canada, we require a 4-year graduate degree and an LSAT, which is the test that students take, the pretest for law school, the LSAT. And so we require a test score and then also an undergrad degree in order for people to apply to the law school. So those are 2 steps. So for students that are perhaps finishing their junior or senior year in college, they need to start thinking about taking that LSAT. And I would definitely recommend for anyone that students prepare for that test, right? So it's interesting. It's sort of like an SAT or ACT, right? When you're going into college, but it's focused on the law, and it is a very tricky exam. So taking some of the prep courses, there's books you can check out, online courses you can take, because the higher you score you get on that LSAT, that will open more doors for students in terms of law schools, because law schools are very competitive. We had a lot of very strong applicants, highly qualified people that we were not able to admit this year. Just we don't have the space for them. So we're at a point right now across the country where applications for law school are up. And so I would encourage anyone interested to do the best you can in undergrad, and then also do the best you can on that LSAT, because those are the two, your undergraduate GPA and your LSAT score are how admissions offices primarily make decisions about who to admit. Now, for us, we also do focus a lot on the personal statements that students write about, their interest in the law school and the mission, and why they want to come here versus other places. And so that's also very relevant for people to think about.
So the essays are important.
They are. They absolutely are. We review them, especially for students that, let's say you're kind of on the bubble, right? And it's you have decent scores, but you're kind of on the bubble. That's where those personal statements really can make a difference. And again, our admissions committee does review them and looks closely at, why does this particular applicant want to come here, and why here versus some other law school? So, there's only 202 accredited law schools in the United States, and they're competitive. So I would just say for students, it's really something that you need to think about. You need to have a plan, and do your best, both in undergrad and then also on the LSAT, because that will primarily determine, which law schools you're even in the running for. And again, it's a competitive thing. So we are a school where we're trying to promote the overall diversity of the bar, right? Yes. Like we're not interested in perpetuating injustice, right? Or injustice, I should say. So we really are trying to make sure that we're adding to the diversity of the bar in all ways, right? And so that's something that we're looking at too. Of course, we're within the law, right? We follow what we have to do from whether it's Supreme Court decisions or rules on student loans and that kind of thing. But we're definitely trying to have a class that represents our community here in Southeast Michigan, and that overall that we're contributing to the diversity of the bar. And I'll say we're very proud of our history. We were, an early, a law school that in the very early days admitted women. So when you look down at some of our class composites from the 19 teens and 20s, there's women in those composites, which was not the case everywhere. Also people of color, right? We've had a long history here of being open to people from all different backgrounds, all different diversity, whether we're talking about veterans, people growing up on farms, or, kids that go to high school here in Detroit. And so I would just say, for anyone who's interested in law school, in your personal statement, tell us who you are, tell us why you want to come here, and that can really help. Students that are kind of on that bubble of whether or not to get admitted, we definitely do consider that, and their reasoning as to why they want to be here. What about our institution speaks to them? Yeah.
Well, and it is true. I do see a wide variety of students walking in, and I love it. I love to see that. That's what justice looks like.
That's right. And it's, we need to make sure that we're demonstrating on our faculty as well. So we've been working over the years to make sure that we have a diverse faculty, because again, it's important for people who are thinking about law school to see themselves in leadership at a law school, right? Whether that's, faculty, administration. And so we've really been trying to, again, as much as we can, reflect our community here in Southeast Michigan, with the folks we have on our faculty, but also with our students. And that's great. So one of the things that we're really proud of is, again, our history of being an institution that's open to all. If you can do the work, we want you here. That's really the only question. And it's been that way, since 1912, and that's something that we're really proud of.
Cool. Any last things that you would like to share that maybe I wouldn't have thought to ask, that you like, hey, I really want to share this with somebody?
Sure. Well, just thinking a little bit down the road, in 2027, it'll be the 150th anniversary of the university. And so there's already a bunch of planning going on at the university level. I know talked a little bit, of course, with the Jesuits as well, but just wanting to start, planning for that exciting celebration we have coming up here in a couple of years. And the law school was the original home of UD Jesuit prep school as well. And so there's going to be a lot of commemorations around that anniversary too. So just something that for folks that, parishioners that are interested in the local history, I mean, that's something that's, pretty cool, right? The fact that we'll have that 150 year celebration from, being right here. I really value the connections that we have with the church. I mean, the history is so important to the overall institution, but it's just great being neighbors. We share the wall, share a door, it's really, it makes us special and unique in terms of law schools. And it's just something that we want to be a great partner with St. Peter and Paul Church, as well as here in the community. And so I really appreciate the time, and it's been great chatting with you. And I should also say, please, people that are interested in law school at all ages, right? We'd love to talk with you. We're launching in the fall of 2026. We're launching an online JD, so an online law degree program, which we're really targeting, part-time students, people that used to be in our night school program, which has been phased out. Just things change, right? People's work-life balance, everything has shifted over the last 10, 15 years, and we're seeing more interest in online classwork for people that can't be full-time in person. And so, we'll be launching with the first in the state, an online JD that we're opening in fall of 2026. There'll be small classes. It's going to be 25 students in the first class. So I think it'll be pretty competitive. But I just mentioned that to say that for people that are maybe second, third career, or even thinking like, hey, it might be interesting to have a law degree for whatever's next in their lives. I thought I'd mention that too, that it's new. We're excited about it. It's accredited. It's, it'll be just like our residential law program. It's just that it will be virtual. We have working now and recording the first few courses, and it'll be highly produced. And so anyway, we're very excited about that. We just announced that program last week. So it's
wow, that is exciting. Yeah, that's very exciting. And I'm glad you're going to be doing that. And it's a nice way to start expanding this, your reach. And we're definitely looking forward to partnering with you for the 150 anniversary in any way that we can. So, we're proud of the work the Jesuits have done in the last 150 years.
Absolutely. Great. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Really nice talking with you.